Mrs. Pell had cooked for the Calloway family for 31 years, and in all that time, she had never once heard the front door of Ashcombe House open without the whole place going quiet first, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. It had been that way for old Mr. Calloway, and it was that way now for his son. Julian Calloway came home the week after the funeral in a black car that moved up the long drive without a sound, and by the time he stepped into the hall, every lamp had been lit, every fire laid, every member of staff standing exactly where they ought to be. That was Miss Wren's doing. It was always Miss Wren's doing. Ashcombe itself had not changed in all that time, not really. The same gray stone, the same long windows, looking out over lawns gone silver with frost, the same portraits watching down the gallery walls. What had changed was the silence in it. Old Mr. Calloway had been a hard man, but he had at least filled a room when he entered it. His son, to Mrs. Pell's eye, seemed more like a door that had been quietly shut and never opened again. Adelaide Wren had run Ashcombe for 40 years, longer than Mrs. Pell had been alive in service there, longer than anyone could properly remember a time before her. She had been old Mr. Calloway's secretary once, then his companion in everything but name, and when he died she simply kept doing what she had always done, deciding what the house needed, what the family required, what was best left unsaid. She moved through the corridors like weather, and the staff had learned long ago that the surest way to keep your place at Ashcombe was to let Miss Wren decide things before you did. Julian was 38, broad-shouldered and gray-eyed, with his father's stillness, and none of his father's warmth that Mrs. Pell could remember. He ran the family's shipping interests from London now, and when he was at Ashcombe, he kept to the East Wing, took his meals alone, and spoke to almost no one except Miss Wren, who brought him his correspondence each morning on a silver tray, and took away whatever he did not wish to think about. The staff feared him, the way staff fear any man whose displeasure could end a livelihood with one quiet word, not because he had ever raised his voice, but because he never had to. It was for the library that the new woman came. The roof above it had leaked for 2 winters running, and the old floor, oak, 200 years old, laid in long boards that ran the length of the room, had buckled and blackened along one wall. A restoration firm was brought in to lift and replace it, and with them came Nora Vance, hired to oversee the work and see that nothing of value was lost or damaged in the process. She was somewhere in her 40s, plainly dressed, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who said good morning to the boot boy with the same courtesy she gave anyone else, and who within a week the staff had stopped noticing at all, which, Mrs. Felsoltze later, was very much the point of people like Nora, and very much the mistake everyone made about them. She worked carefully. Each board was numbered before it was lifted, in case any of them could be saved. Each one was checked underneath and along its length before it went onto the cart. It was on the 11th day, kneeling in the gray afternoon light, with her sleeves rolled in dust in her hair, that Nora found the loose board beneath the window seat, looser than the others, its nails long since rusted through, as though it had been lifted and replaced more than once over the years. When she worked it free, there was a shallow space beneath it, no deeper than a hand, and in that space, wrapped in a square of oilcloth gone stiff and yellow with age, was a letter. She carried it to the window to see it properly. The oilcloth had kept out the damp, and the envelope beneath it was still cream-colored, still sealed, the ink on its front faded to the soft brown of old tea. It was addressed in a careful looping hand to my Julian, when he is older. No surname, no date, just that, my Julian, written the way only a mother writes a name. Nora sat back on her heels and held it for a long moment. The house had a system for things like this. Anything found during the restoration was to be logged and brought to Miss Wren, who kept the household's records, and decided what became of what was found. It was simple, and it was sensible, and Nora had followed it without thinking twice for 10 days running, handing over a brass key, a child's marble, a cracked photograph of a hunting party from before the war. But this was different, and she knew it the moment she read the words again. My Julian, not Mr. Calloway, not the master of the house, a mother's name for her son, hidden where only someone who meant it to stay hidden would ever think to look. And Nora had been in service long enough, in one house or another, to know that some things were kept from people not by accident, but on purpose, by someone who had decided long ago what that person did not need to know. She thought about it through the rest of the afternoon, turning it over the way she turned over anything that troubled her. quietly, without fuss, the way she did everything. By evening, she had made up her mind. She washed her hands, smoothed her apron, and asked one of the older maids, as casually as she could manage, where she might find Mr. Calloway at this hour. The maid's eyes went wide. "You don't go to Mr. Calloway," she whispered. "Anything for him goes through Miss Wren." Nora thanked her and went to find Mr. Calloway anyway. He was in the small study off the east gallery, the one room in the house that still smelled faintly of his father's pipe tobacco, going through papers by lamplight. When the housekeeper's knock came, soft, and at an hour no one ever knocked, he looked up with the particular stillness of a man unused to surprise. Nora stood in the doorway in her work clothes, dust still on her hands, and did not apologize for the hour, or for coming herself instead of sendings word through the proper channels. She simply said that she had found something in the library floor that afternoon, that it was addressed to him, and that she had thought he ought to have it directly, rather than have it logged with the rest. She held it out. He did not take it at once. He looked at the envelope in her hand for a long moment. At the hand that had written it, Mrs. Pell would learn later, recognizing it before he had even touched the paper. And something in his face, something that had been held very still for a very long time, seemed to falter. "Where did you find this?" he said, and it was not quite a question. "Beneath a loose board, under the window seat. It had been put there with care, sir, wrapped against the damp." Nora hesitated, and then added gently, "Because it seemed to matter. It looked to me like something meant to be kept safe, not lost. I thought you should be the one to open it." He took it from her then, carefully, the way a man takes something he is afraid might not be real. He thanked her quietly, but he did thank her, which the staff would later agree was itself a small wonder, and Nora withdrew, closing the door softly behind her, and went back to her work without telling another soul what had passed between them. But Miss Wren heard of it within the hour. She always did. Mrs. Pell, setting out the supper trays, saw her pass through the kitchen passage with her face composed into its usual calm, and yet there was something in the set of her shoulders, something tight and watchful, that Mrs. Pell had not seen in 40 years of watching that woman move through this house, as though she owned every stone of it. Julian did not come down to dinner that night. He sat alone in the study with the letter long after the lamp had burned low, and when he finally opened it, the handwriting inside was the same as the hand on the envelope. His mother's hand, which he had not seen in 30 years, since she had died when he was 8 years old, and the house had quietly stopped speaking her name. She had written it, she said, on an evening not long before the end, when she was already too unwell to be sure how much longer she had. She wrote that she did not know how old he would be when he found it, only that she hoped he would. She told him about the year he was born, about a summer at the seaside he was too young to remember, about the sound of his laugh as a small boy, which she said was the truest sound she had ever heard in that house. And then, near the end, she wrote the lines that Julian would read again and again that night, until the ink blurred not from age, but from something else entirely. "Be soft where the world has made you hard, my darling boy. Power will teach you to be feared. Do not let it teach you not to be loved. I have written to you every year since, birthdays, Christmases, the small ordinary days, so that wherever I am, you will know I never stopped. I hope they reached you. I hope you kept them." Julian sat with that for a long time, because he had never received a single one. In the days that followed, he did something he had not done in years. He went looking, himself, through the old estate ledgers and correspondence books that Miss Wren had kept for decades, the ones no one else was permitted to touch. It took him 2 days to find what he was looking for. A slim drawer of letters, dozens of them, each addressed in his mother's hand to my Julian, none of them ever delivered, each one logged in Miss Wren's careful handwriting under a single word. Retained. He sent for her that evening. What passed between them in that room, no one but the two of them ever heard in full, but Mrs. Pell, passing the gallery afterward, saw Miss Wren come out alone, walking very upright, very pale, and saw that for the first time in 40 years she looked, more than anything, old. What Julian told the staff the next morning was simple and final. Miss Wren would be retiring, with a generous pension, and the household's thanks for her long service, and would be leaving Ashcombe by the end of the week. He said nothing of letters, then or ever, to anyone but Nora, and he told her only because he said she was the reason he finally knew. After that, the house was different, though it took the staff a little while to put their finger on how. Julian began coming down to dinner again. He asked, more than once after the progress of the library floor, and more than once, Mrs. Pell noticed, found a reason to be in the gallery himself when Nora's was there, asking her opinion on some small thing as though it mattered to him, which, by then it plainly did. He was not a man given to easy conversation, and Nora was not a woman who pushed for it. But over the weeks of that autumn, something steady grew between them. Unhurried, plain, the kind of thing built the way the library floor itself was being rebuilt, board by careful board. One gray afternoon, Mrs. Pell looked out from the kitchen window and saw the two of them walking the length of the lower lawn, together, no umbrella between them, though it had begun to spit with rain, Julian with his hands behind his back and his head bent toward whatever Nora was saying, and Nora laughing, actually laughing. A sound Mrs. Pell had not once heard from anyone in that house in 31 years. Neither of them seemed to notice the rain at all. By the time they came in, both were soaked through, and neither seemed to mind. And Julian asked the kitchen, with something almost like embarrassment, whether there might be tea enough for two by the library fire. The library was finished just before Christmas. The new oak had been laid to match the old, sanded and oiled until it glowed in the firelight, and beneath the restored window seat, at Julian's quiet instruction, a small brass plate had been set into the floor, engraved with nothing but 2 words and a date, for Margaret. It was there, on the evening the room was finished, that Julian asked Nora to stay on at Ashcombe. Not as housekeeper, he said, but as the woman he hoped, in time, would be its mistress, if she would have him. He told her, with more feeling than the staff had ever heard from a Calloway, that she had given him back his mother, and that he did not intend to let her walk out of his life the way he had so nearly let everything else. Mrs. Pell was in the kitchen passage when word came down, and she set down the tray she was carrying and had to sit for a moment, because in 31 years she had never once seen this house feel warm the way it felt that night. Every lamp lit, the fires built high, and for the first time since she could remember, no one in Ashcombe House holding their breath at all.